Regardless of whether you enjoy the occasional libation, wine has been an essential part of human history for millennia. The Greeks and Romans had a god of wine. It's been an essential part of religious ceremonies for many religions for at least thousands of years. It's memorialized on Egyptian tombs, where wine was considered to be an essential part of the afterlife. And of course, for many hundreds of years, drinking wine and beer was safer than drinking water. The roots of the wine industry go very deep, and of course they continue today. According to Statista, the global wine market in 2018 was valued at more than $350 billion. And yet all this long history could not protect the wine industry from devastation. The Great Wine Blight of the 19th century threatened the very existence of grapes. And how a pestilence that was brought by vines from the United States ended up being eradicated by those same vines is history that deserves to be remembered. It is believed that the Old World vine named Vitis vinifera originated in the Caucasus and Zagros mountain regions east of the Black Sea, where some of the highest peaks in Europe spread through Azerbaijan, northern Iran, and eastern Turkey. A Stone Age people known as the Shulavari Shomu were using obsidian tools, domesticating cattle and growing grapes as far back as 8,000 years ago. The first known winery was established in a cave system in Armenia somewhere around 4100 BC, near the village of Ereni, which is still known for its winemaking. With the spread of civilization south and west through the Mediterranean, grapes and wine also spread. Over thousands of years, the plant diversified and adapted to various climes and locations, leading to what is now over 1,300 different varieties of grapes. In areas where wine grapes were a greater agricultural staple, larger numbers of varieties flourished. For example, in France and Italy combined, there are currently more than 500 varieties of grapes, whereas Greece has fewer than 80, and Turkey only a third of that. French colonists in America tried to establish vineyards in Florida with European vines as early as the 17th century. These failed without the colonists understanding why. However, the Spanish missionaries had success with the European vines in Texas in the 17th century and then California in the 18th century. And California wine, and therefore grapes, boomed during the gold rush. In 1837, when German immigrants began settling in the Missouri River lands at current-day Hermann, Missouri, they found native grapevines in abundance. The early town settlers sold vacant lots for $50 over 5 years interest-free, with the only condition being that they had to be used for grapes. Over the following years, their wine quality quickly improved with the introduction of cultivated varieties and the help of self-taught man named George Hussman. Hussman's family immigrated to Hermann when he was 10. His father began growing grapes, and George planted his own vines on his father's farm at the age of 20. Without any formal higher education, he became a renowned scientist and educator, and, furthermore, is considered the father of the Missouri grape industry. Hussman studied soil types and experimented with hybrids to find grapes that would thrive in the heat and humidity of summer and freezing cold of winter in Missouri. Meanwhile, Europe was enjoying the benefits of globalization. Grapes were brought from America for grafting and experimenting with different varieties. Steamships shortened trips across the ocean, bringing imports from all over the world. But with the spread of goods came disease. Sometime before 1863, vines containing a tiny aphid-like pest were rooted in France. Called phylloxera for the Greek for dry leaf, the pest devastated thousands of acres of grapevines in France in the 1800s in what was called the Great French Wine Blight. The blight then spread throughout Europe, as far away as Africa and Australia, and eventually even to the European vines in California. The French government tasked a group of men with uncovering the cause of the blight. Jules Planchon, a French botanist and head of the Botanical Sciences Department at Montpellier University, examined dying and dead plants and roots and declared phylloxera to be the cause. But in late 19th century Europe, scientists were not always a trusted lot. Industrialization and modernization were new, and old thinking with myths and legends still carried weight. Even for those who concluded that the bug caused the disease, the complex life cycle made insecticides and chemicals ineffective in stopping the plague. Vintners went to extreme lengths to try to eradicate the infestations, and the French government offered a bounty to the hero who could find the cure. Some of these remedies included flooding vineyards, burning vineyards, and applying urine or garlic, or simply praying. Estimates claim the loss was as high as 9/10 of grape production. The stakes were high, but the enemy was still partially a mystery. The life cycle of phylloxera is strange. It was called Phylloxera vacitrix, or the devastator, because in one form, aptly called the root form, it feeds on the roots of the vine, injecting a poison that prevents the natural healing of the plant, forming nodules and eventually killing the plant entirely. In another form, the sexual form, the male and female hatch, completely lacking a digestive system. They mate and then the male dies. The female lays one lone egg before she, too, dies. This egg becomes a nymph of the leaf form, which lays eggs and galls on the leaves that form embryos through asexual reproduction, which can become either leaf form or go subterranean to infect the roots as the root form, producing up to 7 generations, which can all reproduce asexually, or become the sexual form, ad nauseam. The generation born in autumn overwinters in the roots to emerge in spring. To complicate things more, in certain humid climates, it can also transform into a winged version, flying to other vines to bring more devastation. And to complicate matters even further, Phylloxera survive mainly in different stages of this cycle, depending on which type of vine they're invading. The roots of the European grape Vitis vinifera are thinner, so the subterranean version destroys the plant from the roots, injecting its poison and killing it off completely within a few seasons. The Native American grape rootstocks are sturdier and mostly unaffected, and the vines are tolerant to the bug, which procreates as the leaf form, feeding on the vines and producing annoying galls that don't kill off the plant. For those old world vines, when the plant died, the bug moved on, and so examining the dead plants didn't actually reveal the presence of the bug, even though by then it would be covering the neighboring vineyards. 2 schools of thought emerged. There were those who thought phylloxera was causing the illness, but there were others who thought that phylloxera was merely a symptom, that the bugs moved in as the plant was already dying. Meanwhile, back in Missouri, Vitis labrusca was flourishing, producing about 1.3 million gallons of wine and even winning awards. Stonehill Winery, which was the 2nd largest winery in the United States and 3rd largest in the world, won the highest honor, Best Wine of All Nations, at the 1873 Vienna World Expo with its American heritage grape, the Norton. And American scientist Charles Valentine Riley, the first state entomologist for the state of Missouri, confirmed Planchon's theory of phylloxera as the cause of the blight. He also noted that Vitis labrusca and other American vines, native and hybrid, were resistant to the bug and advised grafting these resistant American rootstocks. Importing the American grape rootstocks and grafting French vines onto it would make the vines themselves resistant to the organism. Yet for many French vintners, the thought of grafting their European vines onto American rootstock, the same American rootstock which had harbored the vile creature currently wreaking havoc on their livelihood, was abhorrent. The options were limited: spend vast sums of money on chemicals that may or may not work, give up their grapes to hire themselves to larger vineyards in need of help, or simply replace their grapevines with wheat or other agricultural goods. The economic impact of phylloxera was enormous. It is estimated that in the 15 years period from the late 1850s to the mid-1870s, France's wine industry took a loss of over 10 billion francs. But those vintners that were determined to save their grapes at any cost began grafting. American rootstocks from various regions were gathered and sent to France. 10 million from Missouri alone, although those were eventually discarded because they did not fare well in the French soil. Thomas Munson, a Texas horticulturalist and prolific breeder of grapes, suggested the use of rootstock from the Central Hill region of Texas, because the soil there resembled the limestone soil in many vineyards of France, making them most appropriate for the location. Frost grapes, or Vitis riparia, a widespread indigenous North American species being well known for its hardiness, also became a popular choice, although on its own this variety of grape is not suitable for wine. And with the trial and error of grafting and growing, eventually vintners grafting European vines onto resistant American rootstock proved successful. The process was officially adopted, and the reconstitution of grapes in Europe and around the world began. For his part in saving grapes, Riley received the French Grand Gold Medal and was named a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor in 1884. Munson received the Order of Agricultural Merit in 1888. Planchon had a square named in his honor in Montpelier with a stone monument. It depicts a farmer offering thanks to Planchon, with the inscription on the back noting that it was the Americans who saved the French wine industry. Yet the bounty that was promised, over 300,000 francs, was never awarded, as the French government decided that the blight wasn't cured, but rather a workaround was found with grafting. Phylloxera is still a threat, as there's still no chemical that can deter the pest, and there's very few rootstocks today that have not been grafted onto phylloxera-resistant rootstock. But variety is important to the protection of grapes. And one of the problems today is that some 50 of the most popular types, things like Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Chardonnay, make up some 3/4 of the grapes grown in vineyards. Some other varieties are essentially going extinct because vintners are driven by economic concerns to grow these popular and well-known varieties. For example, there's some $2.5 billion worth of Chardonnay sold in the United States every year, a powerful incentive to grow that popular variety. But the species richness and diversity is what protects it from things like pests and diseases and changes in climate. And part of this problem came as a result of the wine blight. Vermont vintner Diedrich Heeken explained in a 2018 edition of the magazine Wine Enthusiast. After rescuing the world's wine industry, the French government chose to push down rising interest in hybrids through a savvy smear campaign, and Western winemaking cultures inherited a negative bias. Saving French wine created a culture that excluded the grapes that had saved it. Wine importer Andrew Stover notes in the same article that American varieties were further damaged when the U.S. wine industry was virtually wiped out during Prohibition. And one solution is to simply broaden your scope. Go to the store and pick out a different bottle. Not just the one because you recognize the name, but maybe something just because you like the bottle or just a type of grape you've never tried before. Food and Wine magazine suggests that maybe you try Ferment, which is Hungary's primary white, or Blaufränkisch, which is an Austrian medium-bodied red. But our friends over at the Stonehill Winery, whom we'd like to thank for their gracious help in researching this episode, might suggest a fine Missouri Norton. If you try something different, you might convince a vintner to continue to cultivate a different grape, maybe an indigenous variety, or maybe a variety whose history goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. You might even help to preserve wine for future generations. And that would be history that deserves to be remembered. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.